The photograph was still on the refrigerator when everything fell apart. It had been there for almost a year, held up by a magnet shaped like a tiny mountain, the kind you buy at airport gift shops and forget about until they become permanent fixtures of your kitchen. In the photo, Claire and I are standing on the left side of the wedding party. She's wearing a sage green dress. I'm in a charcoal suit that she picked out for me 3 weeks before the ceremony. Marcus is in the center, grinning the way he always grinned, wide, unguarded, like a man who had never once in his life felt out of place. His new wife Renee is beside him, her veil catching the light. What I remember most about that day isn't the ceremony or the dinner or the speeches. What I remember is Claire crying. Not the polite kind of crying you do at weddings, the kind where you dab your eyes with a folded napkin and smile apologetically at whoever notices. This was something else. She cried from the moment the processional music started, and she didn't really stop until well after the vows were finished. Her shoulders shook slightly. She pressed her lips together and stared straight ahead, and I reached over and took her hand, and she squeezed mine so hard her knuckles went pale. I leaned down and whispered, "Are you okay?" She nodded without looking at me. "It's just beautiful," she said. I always cry at weddings. I believed her. I had no reason not to. 11 years of marriage and I still believed almost everything she told me. My name is Daniel. I'm 41 years old. I design load-bearing structures for a mid-sized engineering firm in downtown Asheville, bridges, parking structures, the bones of buildings that other people fill in with glass and light and furniture. There is something I've always liked about that kind of work. You spend months calculating exactly how much weight a thing can hold before it breaks. You account for stress points and failure thresholds. You build in redundancy. You test the structure before you trust it. It has occurred to me since then that I applied almost none of that thinking to my marriage. Claire and I met at a gallery opening in 2012. She was 27 and had just launched her own interior design practice. I was 30 and had recently made junior partner at the firm. We were introduced by a mutual friend at the wine table, and within 20 minutes we had drifted away from the group entirely, standing near a large abstract canvas arguing pleasantly about whether the painting was finished or abandoned. She thought it was finished. I thought the artist had given up. She laughed at that, a real laugh, surprised out of her, and I think that was the moment. We were married 14 months later in a small ceremony outside the city. We bought a house in the North Asheville Hills 2 years after that. Owen was born when I was 33, and by the time he was learning to walk I had decided, quietly and without fanfare, that my life had turned out well. Better than I'd had any right to expect. Marcus had been in my life longer than Claire had. We met in college, a structural engineering program where he lasted exactly 1 semester before switching to business. We stayed close anyway. He had an ease about him that I envied without resentment, the kind of man who made rooms feel lighter simply by entering them. Over the years our friendship had absorbed career changes, cross-country moves, 2 of his failed relationships before Renee, Owen's birth, my father's death. It was the kind of friendship that required no maintenance because it seemed to exist on a different level, beneath the surface of schedules and phone calls, somewhere more fundamental. He was the best man at my wedding. I was the best man at his. I drove to the venue that morning with his boutonniere in a box on the passenger seat, and I remember thinking that I was one of the luckiest men I knew. The first thing that felt wrong, and I mean the very first thing, before any of the others, wasn't a text message or a late night or a strange perfume. It was a silence. It was a Tuesday in late October, about 6 weeks after Marcus and Renee's wedding. Owen was at school. I had come home early because a site inspection had been cancelled, and I walked in to find Claire sitting at the kitchen island with her laptop open and her coffee going cold beside her. She didn't hear me come in. She was staring at the screen with an expression I hadn't seen on her face before, or hadn't recognized before, something between concentration and pain. Her jaw was tight. Her right hand was pressed flat against the counter like she needed to feel something solid. I said her name. She startled so badly she knocked the coffee mug sideways. It didn't fall but it rocked hard, and she grabbed it and looked up at me with wide eyes and then immediately smiled. "You're home early," she said. "Inspection got cancelled. What are you working on?" She turned the laptop slightly, not closing it, just angling it away. "Client proposal. The Hendersons. You know how they are." I did know how they were. I poured myself a glass of water and stood at the counter and we talked about the Hendersons for a few minutes and then about Owen's parent-teacher conference and then about whether we needed to replace the gutters before winter. Ordinary conversation. The architecture of an ordinary afternoon. But the image stayed with me, that expression on her face before she knew I was there. I didn't examine it. I filed it away in some part of my mind that wasn't ready to open that drawer yet. Looking back now, that was the moment. Not the moment I found out. The moment something changed, even though I had no idea what it was or why. The photograph was still on the refrigerator. Marcus was still grinning. And I was still the man standing beside Claire in the charcoal suit she had picked out for me, holding her hand, believing everything she said. Life in the weeks that followed had the texture of something almost right. Almost. That's the word I keep returning to. Not wrong, not broken, almost. The way a door that's slightly off its frame doesn't slam shut but doesn't close cleanly either. You push it and it catches. You push harder and it gives. And after a while you stop noticing because you've adjusted to the resistance, and adjusting to resistance is something humans are extraordinarily good at. Claire was busy that fall. Her practice had taken on 3 new clients, a restaurant renovation in West Asheville, a residential project in Weaverville, and something she described vaguely as a corporate consultation that required more travel than usual. I didn't question the travel. She had always been independent in her work, and I had always respected that. We had built our marriage on the understanding that we were 2 people who chose each other, not 2 people who needed each other to function. There's a difference. I believed in that difference. What I didn't notice, or chose not to notice, was how the travel had shifted in character. It wasn't more frequent, exactly. It was more private. She used to mention client names, describe projects in enough detail that I could picture them. That fall, the details thinned out. If I asked about the corporate consultation she would answer, but the answers felt summarized. Edited down to the parts that required no follow-up. I told myself she was tired. That the workload was genuinely heavy. That not every silence is a secret. Owen was 8 that year, and in the way that 8-year-olds sometimes do, he had become obsessed with a single hobby to the exclusion of almost everything else, in his case, building model aircraft. The dining room table had become a permanent workshop, covered in balsa wood and paint pots and tiny instruction sheets printed in 6 languages. Some evenings the 3 of us would sit around it together, Owen directing operations with total authority, Claire cutting pieces with the small craft knife he wasn't allowed to handle himself, me reading the instructions aloud in a mock-serious voice that made him collapse with laughter. Those evenings felt real. Whatever else was shifting at the edges, those evenings felt completely real. Marcus called me on a Thursday night in early November. We hadn't spoken in a few weeks, which wasn't unusual. He had been traveling for work, a development project in Charlotte, and our communication had always run in rhythms, intense for a period and then quiet for a while without either of us taking it personally. He sounded normal on the phone. Relaxed, slightly distracted, asking about Owen's aircraft project and whether I'd watched the playoff game. We talked for maybe 20 minutes. Near the end of the call, he mentioned that Renee was visiting her sister in Portland for the week. Quiet house, I said. Yeah, he said. It's fine. I've got work. I didn't think anything of it. I told him we should get dinner when he was back in Asheville. He said absolutely, 100%, let's actually do it this time. The way we'd been saying that to each other for 15 years. What I didn't know, what I had no way of knowing then, was that Claire had taken the following Friday off. I only found out later when I happened to check the shared calendar we used for Owen's schedule and noticed the day marked simply, Personal Day. She hadn't mentioned it. When I asked her about it that weekend, casually, the way you ask about anything you noticed in passing, she said a client meeting had been cancelled and she'd decided to use the day to catch up on administrative work at home. How'd that go? I asked. Fine, she said. Boring. I reorganized my files. Her voice was easy. Her posture was easy. She was dicing an onion at the counter and she didn't look up. I didn't ask again. I hadn't put it together yet, Marcus's quiet house, Claire's unmarked Friday, the slightly too casual answer. Each detail was small enough to dismiss. Together they would have meant something. But we don't tend to add things up until we're already afraid of the sum. It was Sandra, Claire's mother, who planted the first seed without knowing she was planting anything at all. She came for dinner on a Sunday in mid-November, the way she did roughly once a month, bringing a bottle of wine she'd agonized over and a dessert she'd made herself. Sandra was a practical woman in her late 60s who had strong opinions about grout colors and weak opinions about most everything else. She adored Owen and treated me with the warm, faintly assessing affection of a woman who had accepted her son-in-law without ever fully deciding whether she approved of him. After dinner, while Claire was putting Owen to bed, Sandra and I sat at the table with the remainder of the wine. She asked about work. I told her about a bridge project in Buncombe County that was giving me problems. She listened with the polite attention of someone who doesn't understand the details but is too well-mannered to let it show. Then, in the way that older people sometimes say important things, casually, as a footnote to a longer thought, she said, "Claire seems tired lately. Has she seemed tried to you?" "She's been busy," I said. Sandra nodded slowly. She turned her wine glass by the stem. "She called me last week. Twice in one day, which isn't like her. She didn't really say anything. Just wanted to talk," she said. She paused. "I thought maybe something had happened between the two of you." "Not that I know of," I said. Sandra looked at me for a moment, not unkindly. "No," she said. "I didn't think so." And then she changed the subject, and I let her, and by the time Claire came back downstairs we were talking about grout colors. But I sat with what Sandra had said for a long time after she left. Twice in one day. Just wanted to talk. Claire was not, by nature, someone who called her mother twice in one day for no reason. She was not someone who needed that kind of contact. Whatever she had been carrying in those phone calls, she hadn't brought it to me. I remember how something tightened in my chest that night, lying in the dark beside her while she slept. Not suspicion exactly. Something quieter than that, and more permanent. December arrived and with it the particular busyness of the holiday season, Owen's school concert, a firm dinner I was expected to attend, Claire's end-of-year client presentations. The house filled with the smell of pine and beeswax candles, and for a stretch of days everything felt warm and ordinary and almost deliberately normal, the kind of normal that you construct together without discussing it. Marcus and Renee came for dinner on the second Saturday of the month. I had been looking forward to it. Hosting had always been something Claire and I did well together. She arranged the table and the lighting and the music, I cooked, and the combination of our separate competencies produced evenings that guests consistently described as effortless. That night we made lamb and roasted vegetables and a dessert Claire had found in a magazine. Renee brought flowers. Marcus brought a very good bottle of Burgundy and set it on the counter and said, "Don't let me forget I brought that or Daniel will drink it alone." Renee was a radiologist, precise, observant, with a dry wit that took some people by surprise. I had always liked her. She had a way of paying attention that felt thorough without being intrusive. That night she talked about a conference she'd attended in Boston, about a colleague who had done something professionally embarrassing, about her plans to visit her parents in February. She was entirely normal. What wasn't normal, or what I noticed without categorizing, was the space between Marcus and Claire at the dinner table. It wasn't closeness that caught my attention. It was the opposite. They barely spoke directly to each other all evening. When they did, it was brief, slightly formal, the way people sometimes speak when they're being careful. I noticed that Claire refilled Renee's wine glass twice without offering Marcus any. I noticed that Marcus addressed almost all of his remarks to me or to Renee, swinging wide around Claire the way you navigate around a piece of furniture you've bumped into before. At one point, when I was in the kitchen carving the lamb, I could hear the three of them talking in the dining room. I heard Renee laugh. I heard Marcus say something about the conference. I did not hear Claire's voice for almost 4 minutes. I told myself it was nothing. That friendships between couples are complex, that people have off nights, that Claire was tired from the week and sometimes went quiet in company when she was tired. I believed this because I had decided to believe it, and there is a difference between believing something and choosing to believe it, though at the time I couldn't have told you where that line was. After they left, Claire washed the dishes while I packed the leftovers. We worked in comfortable silence. Then she said, without turning around, "Renee looked beautiful tonight." "She did," I said. "Marcus seems happy." "Yeah," I said. "He does." Claire didn't say anything else. She turned off the tap and dried her hands on the dish towel hanging from the oven handle and said she was going up to read. I stood in the kitchen alone for a moment, holding a container of leftover lamb, and felt the specific loneliness of being in a room where something has almost been said. January was when the phone began to matter. It had never mattered before, or rather, I had never thought about it. Claire had her phone, I had mine, and neither of us had ever felt the need to monitor the other. That was part of the architecture of our marriage too, trust as a default setting, privacy as a shared value. What changed wasn't dramatic. It was a series of small adjustments so gradual I'm not sure I could have identified any single one as the moment I started paying attention. She began taking the phone to the bathroom. She began placing it face down on the counter when she was home, which she hadn't done before. She began sleeping with it on her side of the bed instead of on the charger across the room. None of these things, individually, means anything. People adjust their phone habits for dozens of reasons that have nothing to do with secrets. I knew this. I reminded myself of this. But there was also this. Twice in January I walked into a room where Claire was typing on her phone, and both times she finished her message and put the phone down before acknowledging me. Not guiltily, efficiently. The way you complete a task before switching your attention. Except that both times, when she looked up, her expression took a half-second longer than usual to settle into neutral. I noticed. I didn't act on it. I was afraid of what acting on it would mean. I hadn't been building a marriage, I thought later, much later, when I could think about it at all. I had been maintaining the appearance of one and telling myself that was the same thing. Not because I didn't love her. Because I was afraid that looking too closely would cost me something I wasn't ready to lose. The real turning point, though, the thing I can look back on now and identify as the moment the ground actually shifted, happened on a Friday evening in late January. Owen had a sleepover at his friend Caleb's house. Claire had mentioned going to a yoga class at 7. I worked late at the office and came home around 8 to an empty house. I made myself dinner and watched part of a documentary and went to bed. At 11:15 I woke up and the other side of the bed was empty. I went downstairs. Her coat was gone. Her keys were gone. I checked my phone, no message. I called her. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. I sat on the couch in the dark kitchen and waited. The refrigerator hummed. The photograph was on the door, Marcus's grinning, Renee's veil, Claire in sage green. She came home at 12:40. I heard her key in the lock, heard her pause in the hallway the way you pause when you realize the house isn't the way you left it. Then she came into the kitchen and found me sitting there. She wasn't startled this time. She was very still. "There was a group of us," she said, before I could ask. "After class. We went to that wine bar on Lexington. I should have texted. I'm sorry." Her voice was steady. Her coat smelled faintly of cold air. "Which wine bar?" I asked. "Juniper," she said. "You know it." "Who was there?" She named 3 women from her yoga class. All names I recognized. All plausible. All verifiable, in theory, if I'd been the kind of person who verified things. I wasn't. Not yet. "Okay," I said. She kissed me on the forehead and went upstairs. I sat for another few minutes in the dark and then I followed her. That detail seemed insignificant at the time, the names she gave, the steadiness of her voice, the practiced reasonableness of the explanation. It wasn't. It was the first time I understood, on some level I hadn't yet permitted myself to use, that Claire was good at this. I want to be clear about something, I am not a suspicious person by nature. I've thought about this a great deal since, whether that's a character trait or a choice, whether it made me naive or just human. The truth is probably somewhere in between. I was raised in a household where trust was given until it was broken, and that upbringing had shaped my default settings in ways I couldn't fully see. I didn't check Claire's phone. I didn't follow her. I didn't install software or hire anyone or do any of the things I've since read that people do when they've arrived at the place I was approaching. What I did instead was pay attention. Quietly, without announcement, I began to pay attention. It started with the calendar. I went back through the shared family calendar, the one we used for Owen's activities and family appointments, and I cross-referenced it with what I remembered of Claire's schedule over the previous 3 months. There were 7 personal days marked between October and January. She had mentioned 3 of them to me. The other 4 were unmarked in my memory, not because they hadn't happened, but because she hadn't mentioned them. And in 11 years of marriage Claire had never taken 4 unannounced personal days in 3 months. I didn't confront her with this. I wrote the dates down on a notepad and put it in the inside pocket of my winter coat. The second thing I noticed was the mileage. Claire drove a gray Volvo that she'd had for 4 years. In the normal course of her work week, she drove to client sites around the Asheville area, rarely more than 30 or 40 miles in a day. I had helped her track mileage for tax purposes for years, and I knew her patterns. In November and December combined, she had put nearly 900 miles on the car. I found this out by looking at the odometer, not covertly, not even intentionally. I had borrowed her car one morning when mine was in the shop, and I happened to glance at the display, and I happened to remember what it had read the last time I'd driven it. 900 miles in 2 months. For a designer whose clients were clustered within 20 miles of the house. I wrote that down too. The thing about gathering evidence when you love someone is that it doesn't feel like strength. It feels like the loneliest thing you've ever done. Every observation I made in silence. Every note I wrote in a coat pocket or a locked desk drawer at the office. I wasn't building a case for a confrontation, not then. I was building a case against my own fear. Trying to find the point where what I suspected became something I was permitted to believe. My brother Paul called in early February. He's 3 years older than me, lives in Knoxville, works in insurance. We talk every few weeks. He's the kind of man who asks direct questions and waits out the silence for honest answers, which has made him both an excellent claims adjuster and occasionally an uncomfortable brother. "You sound off," he said, about 10 minutes into the call. "I'm fine," I said. "Daniel." I didn't say anything for a moment. Outside my office window, the February sky was the color of old pewter. "I think something's wrong," I said finally. "With the marriage?" "Maybe." He didn't push. He waited. "I don't have anything solid," I said. "Just patterns. Things that don't quite line up." "Trust the patterns," Paul said. "You're an engineer. You read structures for a living. Trust what the structure is telling you." I didn't say anything. "Whatever you find out," he said, "I'm here." After I hung up, I sat for a long time with my hands on my desk. The notepad was in my coat pocket. The mileage was in my memory. Claire was 20 miles away, designing a life I was no longer entirely sure I was at the center of. The red herring arrived in the form of a man named Joel. I found his name on Claire's laptop by accident. She had left it open on the kitchen counter while she ran upstairs, and I walked past and glanced at the screen without intending to, the way your eyes go to any lit surface in a dim room. The email was from a client address, but the name in the signature was Joel, and the tone was familiar in a way that made me stop. I read 3 lines before I pulled myself away. Enough to see warmth. Enough to see inside references. Not enough to know what it meant. For the next 2 weeks, Joel occupied the entirety of my suspicion. I convinced myself, with the thoroughness of someone who has found a manageable target, that Joel was the explanation. Joel was the extra mileage. Joel was the personal days. I researched him, found his architectural firm's website, his LinkedIn profile, his professional photo. I built an entire mental architecture around Joel that had no foundation in fact beyond 3 lines of a warm email. Then, on a Thursday night, Claire mentioned him casually at dinner, a client who had recommended her to his business partner, a man she found professionally stimulating but personally a little exhausting. She used his name freely, without hesitation. She described a meeting she'd had with him that I could have verified in 30 seconds. Joel was exactly what she said he was. I had spent 2 weeks investigating the wrong man while the right answer sat across the dinner table from me every night, refilling Owen's water glass and asking me how the Buncombe County Bridge was coming along. The relief I felt when Joel turned out to be nothing was shameful. I wanted so badly for it to be over, for the discomfort to have a simple resolution, for the structure to hold. I had been so focused on finding an explanation I could live with that I had temporarily stopped looking for the truth. That was a mistake I recognized only later. You don't choose what you find. You choose whether to keep looking. What broke it open was Owen. Not intentionally. He was 8 years old and he was telling me about a dream he'd had, a rambling, half-logical dream the way children's dreams are, involving a camping trip and a castle and a man who could make himself invisible. Like Marcus, he said. I was only half listening. I was doing dishes. What do you mean? I said. Because Marcus is good at hiding, Owen said. He was hiding at our house that day and I found him. I turned off the tap. Which day? I said, keeping my voice entirely level. Owen described it with the uncomplicated accuracy of a child reporting facts. A Friday afternoon, when you weren't home, Daddy, when he had come home from school early because of a water leak and found Marcus's car in the driveway. He had gone inside and called out and found Marcus in the kitchen. He was surprised to see me, Owen said. He made a funny face. Claire had come downstairs a few minutes later. Marcus had stayed for a little while and then left. Owen had been given a special snack and told not to mention it because it was going to be a surprise. Marcus was planning something for Daddy's birthday, Claire had said, and it would ruin the thing if Daddy knew. My birthday was in April. It was February. Owen had kept the secret for 3 months with the uncomplicated loyalty of a child who trusts his mother. I stood at the sink with the water off and my hands still wet and I felt, very clearly, the sensation I imagine is similar to what happens in a structure when the load finally exceeds the threshold. Not a dramatic collapse. A precise, specific failure at the point you spent the least time reinforcing. I didn't ask Owen any more questions. I dried my hands and told him the dream sounded incredible and asked if he wanted to work on the model aircraft after dinner. He said yes. We sat at the dining room table for 2 hours, and I helped him attach the landing gear, and I did not once look in the direction of the kitchen, where Claire was on the phone talking to a client, or at the refrigerator, where Marcus was still grinning in the photograph with his arm around Renee's shoulder. I waited 4 days. I don't fully understand why. Part of it was Owen. I needed him to be at school, needed the house empty in the specific way it was empty when it was just the 2 of us. Part of it was that I needed to be certain of what I was going to say before I said it, which is the engineering instinct applied to the worst possible situation. You don't walk onto a site until you know what you're looking for. On the fourth day, a Tuesday, I came home at noon. Claire was at her desk in the study off the hallway, the small room she used as a home office when she wasn't at client sites. She had her reading glasses on and music playing low from a small speaker on the shelf. She looked up when I appeared in the doorway and her face arranged itself into the particular expression of a woman who is mildly surprised but not alarmed. "You're home early," she said. The second time she had said those words to me. I wondered if she had noticed. "Claire," I said. I didn't move from the doorway. "I know about Marcus." The music kept playing. Something acoustic, soft and unhurried. I watched her face go through 3 distinct changes in approximately 2 seconds, surprise, calculation, and then a kind of settling, the way a person settles when they've been waiting for something long enough that its arrival is almost a relief. She took her reading glasses off. "How long?" she said. "How long have I known, or how long has it been happening?" She looked at her hands. "Both," I said. "I'll answer both. I've known something was wrong since October. I've had confirmation since Saturday. I didn't mention Owen by name. I wasn't going to involve him in this room. As for how long it's been happening, I'm asking you." She told me. I'm not going to recount every detail of what she said, because some things belong only to the people in the room. What I can say is that it had been longer than I'd feared and that it had started in the weeks after Marcus and Renee's wedding. The thing she said that I keep returning to, the thing I didn't expect, was this. I wanted to stop. I tried to stop. 3 times. I looked at her. "But you didn't," I said. "No," she said. "I didn't." The music was still playing. Outside the window, a car went past on the street, and then it was quiet again. "Did you cry at their wedding because you were in love with him?" I asked. She was silent for a long time. "I cried," she said carefully, "because I knew what I was doing was wrong, and I thought getting married would change things for him. That it would end on its own. But it didn't. No." I stood in the doorway for another moment. There was more to say, there was months' worth of conversation still coiled in that room, waiting, but I understood that today was not the day for it. Today I needed to be somewhere I could put my hands on solid walls and feel whether they were still standing. "I'm going to stay at Paul's for a few days," I said. "Owen stays here. I'll tell him it's a work thing." She nodded. Her hands were clasped in her lap. "Daniel." "Not today," I said. I took my coat from the hook in the hallway and left. The drive to Paul's house in Knoxville took 2 hours and 15 minutes. I don't remember most of it. I remember the mountains in the peripheral vision and the radio that I turned off 20 minutes in because I couldn't tolerate any sound that hadn't originated inside my own skull. I remember a rest stop where I sat in the parking lot for 10 minutes without getting out of the car. Paul was home. He opened the door before I knocked. He had seen my headlights, he said. He didn't say anything else. He moved aside to let me in, and I walked past him into his living room and sat down in a chair, and he brought me a glass of water and then a glass of something stronger and sat across from me and waited. "It was Marcus," I said. He didn't react visibly. He may have already suspected. "How long?" he said. "Since the wedding," I said. "His wedding." Paul looked at the floor. Then he said, very quietly, "I'm sorry, Daniel." That was all he said for a long time. We sat together in his living room and the house was quiet and outside the Knoxville night pressed against the windows, and for the first time since October I was somewhere I didn't have to hold anything in place. I cried once, briefly, in the way men cry when they've been holding it for months, suddenly and without warning, and then it's over. Paul handed me a paper towel from the kitchen. We didn't discuss it. "I should tell you about Renee. She called me 9 days later. She had found out, she hadn't needed me to tell her," she said. She had found out through her own methods, quiet and thorough and characteristic of her. She sounded composed in the way that people sound composed when composure is the only thing left holding them together. "I'm sorry," I said. "I know," she said. "I'm sorry too." We talked for almost an hour. Mostly about practical things, lawyers, timelines, what to tell people. Twice she started a sentence she didn't finish. Near the end she said, "I want you to know I had no idea." "I know," I said. "And I want you to know that what you built with her, 11 years of that was real. Whatever she did with it." I didn't know how to answer that. I still don't. The divorce took 7 months. It was not dramatic. We had one lawyer each and a mediator for the custody arrangement, and we sat across a table from each other in a conference room on 2 separate occasions and divided 11 years into categories. The house sold in May. Claire took an apartment near her office. I rented a place in the River Arts District, a converted warehouse unit with high ceilings and concrete floors and windows that looked out over the French Broad River. Owen spent weekdays with Claire and weekends with me, with various modifications for holidays and school events and the ordinary complications of a child's life divided between 2 households. He adapted in the way children adapt when the adults around them behave with enough consistency, not without pain, but without breaking. He asked me once, about 2 months after we'd explained things to him in the careful, age-appropriate language we'd agreed on, whether it was his fault. I sat down on the floor of his room so we were the same height. I looked him directly in the eyes. "No," I said. "This is entirely a grown-up problem. You didn't do anything. You never could have done anything." He considered this with the solemnity of an 8-year-old processing information he doesn't quite have the framework for. "Okay," he said. "And then, can we do the bomber tonight?" He meant the model aircraft. AB-17 he'd been building for 6 weeks. "Absolutely," I said. We worked on it for 3 hours. I let him stay up past his bedtime, and neither of us mentioned it. Claire called in August. Owen was with me for the week. She asked if she could come over, not to the apartment, she corrected herself quickly, just to pick up some of his things she'd left in my car. We stood in the parking garage beneath my building. Owen was upstairs watching a film. She looked thinner than she had in the spring. She was wearing a jacket I hadn't seen before. She said, "I know it's too late. I know I don't deserve anything. But I want you to know I'm in therapy. And I want you to know I'm sorry, Daniel. Not for getting caught. For doing it. For all of it." I looked at her for a long time. The thing about hearing someone apologize when it's too late is that it doesn't feel the way you expect. There was a version of me, the one who had sat on the couch in the dark kitchen in January, waiting for her key in the lock, wanting so badly for the explanation to be simple, who would have done anything to hear those words. That version had spent months rehearsing what they would mean. What I felt instead was the absence of something. Not hatred. Not longing. The particular quiet that comes after a long noise finally stops. "I believe you're sorry," I said. "And I hope the therapy helps. I really do." She waited. "But I'm not able to go backward, Claire." I tried. For a while I thought I could try. But when I'm honest with myself, I stopped. Thought about it. "I can't rebuild on this foundation," I said. "That's not blame. It's just what's true." She nodded slowly. She picked up Owen's bag from the back seat. She said goodbye, and I said goodbye, and she walked to her car, and I went back upstairs. Owen was still watching his film. I sat beside him on the couch and he leaned against my arm without looking away from the screen, the easy unconscious weight of a child who knows exactly where he belongs. Marcus and I never spoke again. There was nothing to say that wouldn't have been either too much or not enough. Renee remarried 2 years later, a cardiologist from Boone, someone she'd met at a medical conference. She sent me a message when it happened, brief and warm, the way she did everything. I sent back 2 lines and meant all of them. I'm writing this from the apartment in the River Arts District. It's early spring. The river is high from snowmelt and it moves fast past the windows, catching the morning light. Owen is in the other room, still asleep. He stayed an extra night because he had a school holiday today. He's 10 now, and the model aircraft have been replaced by a drone he saves for on his own and talks about with a precision and expertise that occasionally makes me feel left behind. The photograph from Marcus and Renee's wedding is gone. I took it off the refrigerator sometime in the spring of that long year and put it in a box in the garage of the old house, and when the house sold I left the box behind. I didn't need the physical evidence of what I'd lost. The memory does that work on its own, and with less ceremony. What I have now is quieter than what I had before. My apartment is clean and ordered in the way that spaces become when only one person is responsible for them. I cook simple things. I work on difficult problems. I have a running route along the river that I do 3 times a week in the early morning, before the city fully wakes up. I'm not over it. I'm not sure that's the right frame for something that reshaped this much of my life. But I'm through it, or through enough of it that I can look at the shape of what happened without flinching. Here is what I know now that I didn't know before: the load-bearing structures of a marriage are not the things you can see. They're not the shared calendar or the dinner parties or the mortgage. They're the moments when you almost asked a question and chose not to. The silences you agreed to maintain because maintaining them was easier than what the answer might cost you. I was an engineer who spent years measuring the weight a bridge could hold, and I never once calculated what I was loading onto the silence between us. The other thing I know is this: grief and self-knowledge are not opposites. I spent a long time being angry, and a long time being sad, and a long time being afraid. And underneath all of it, running quietly like the river outside my window, was the slow, uncomfortable understanding of the ways I had been absent even while present. Not as justification for what Claire did, that was her choice, built on her own failures of character and courage. But as information. As something to carry forward. Owen knocked on my bedroom door at 7:15 that morning. "Dad," he said. "I had a dream about the bomber." "Yeah," I said. "What happened to it?" "It landed," he said, with the satisfied certainty of someone reporting good news. "It made it home." I looked at the ceiling for a moment, listening to the river. "Good," I said. "Come on. I'll make breakfast."